Hello and welcome back to another video, and today we are diving into something that I think is very much discussed but really misunderstood a lot of times, and that is the Vokey wedge grind matrix. So we have our test subject here. Ian, how's it going?
Good, guys, good. Yeah, I think we've wanted to do this one for quite some time. I think, there's a reason we're doing it with Vokey. We're not doing it across every company. It's because the market share that Vokey holds on the professional tour and in the amateur game, it's by far the most played wedge. So I think if you haven't, people aspire to play a Vokey wedge. So I think there's good value in explaining, what each grind does functionally and what each of these letters means.
I know I get a lot of questions. Mike, I know you get a lot of questions as well.
Every Sunday. This is, I had one yesterday. I'm steep. Do I need more bounce and what grind? And I went right to the Vokey website. They're a source of information. We were looking at their website earlier, and it kind of depicts what the grind looks like. So there's a lot of information. I think this video will be helpful to everyone. Regardless of brand of wedge, I just think people understanding grind is the most important.
Yeah. And we're going to touch on both the grind and the player that it's going to generally fit as far as delivery is concerned. So not only are we going to talk a little bit of short game, also some of the playing characteristics that you might be dealing with at your home course, or if you happen to be traveling, maybe you really want to put a different wedge in your bag if that is the case. But we're going to go through, break them all down, because you want to make it as simple as possible. So when you are choosing your next wedge and you don't have access to a fitter, you'll have all the information right here.
Love it. Okay, boys, what are we starting with?
Starting with the F-Grind, probably the creme de la creme of grinds from Vokey. They've had this one for a long time, and it's, the all-around grind. For a lot of players, it suits majority of golfers.
Still the most popular grind on the, you've got M's and L's and S's, and it's still the #1 most popular grind on the truck. Reason for that is, it is a full sole, F full sole, right? So even if Aaron or Bob or one of the technicians does a little grind work to it, they will do a little grind off of an F, and that's really what that is. But we're going to start with the gap wedge. There's two bounce options. There's the 8 and the 12. Touch upon maybe a little bit of who would be an 8 and who would be a 12.
50 to 52, usually this goes through the entire line, but most players are going to be familiar by using an F-Grind in their full swing club. Full sole, full swing, that's kind of how I remember them. And this allows you to, if you're someone who might be a little shallower, you can go to the lower bounce option. If you play in softer conditions, maybe you're a player with speed, you're a little bit steeper, that's when you move into the higher bounce options. And you're just trying to fine tune face contact, which is something we always talk about, to maximize spin, and also make sure that when you are chipping around the greens, your technique matches the wedge grind. So right now you've got the 52.
We've got the 52 8. So
right.
For the slightly shallower player, historically where I have been, but I'm probably training a little bit towards the other way of being in the slightly steeper side of things. So, I probably will make a transition out of the 8 into the 12. It's soft conditions here in Southern Ontario. We definitely, don't get too many kind of days where it's baked out. So I think I will probably jump up from that 8 to the 12. But we'll see if we can deliver some with a little bit of both here, okay? So when we talk about steep versus shallow, right, there's not much context to that. When we're using numbers so we can quantify it here, I would say 3 to 5 would be in the shallower end with this particular club, right? So people will go, well, isn't that pretty steep? Not for a wedge. Not when we've got a short club that stands up as vertical really as anything in the bag. So yes, if we've got a 4-iron or a 5-iron and we're 5.2 degrees down, that particular club, that's pretty steep for that one, but not for a wedge. Okay, so let's hit a couple more, go with the shallower delivery. Yeah, so around 5, and we can see where that strike is. It's kind of ideal.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a problem. Those felt great. Those ones a little bit low in the head, as Aaron said on the podcast with us. Groove 3, right? That's kind of the sweet spot. So catching that a little bit lower in the head. So let's do the steeper delivery and watch that strike move vertically. When we're in fits, when we're fitting you guys, we are looking at this vertical contact. We're trying to use the bounce to influence the vertical contact, so ball speed preservation, launch and spin, trying to kind of really regulate that, get them really, really tight. And we're trying to use the bounce to move that strike up and down the head.
Exactly.
Six, 4. Let's go for miles.
Good swing. They are going a long way.
So D-Grind for me has become a real favorite. A new grind, I think it came in
7?
it was 7, yeah, SM7, so it's now been in for 3 editions. I love it, absolutely think it's fantastic. A kind of high bounce M, right? A lot of people have tried an M, you know, the heel and toe relief, but this one just is so functional to me. We'll hit some full shots, then we'll hit some little short ones with it as well.
To me, like the big advantage of the D-Grind is you have that higher bounce towards the front of the wedge, but there's a lot of material removed from the back and then on the heel and toe. So for those players that do play, and as we touched on with the F-Grind, softer conditions, but you know, you're not hitting that full swing shot all the time. You are manipulating the blade a little bit. So whether it be around the greens, say you're closing the club face and you start putting that leading edge lower to the ground, you're taking loft off it.
Yep.
Still stays out of the turf. But if you've got a bunker shot out of soft sand, or you've got a tighter lie, maybe not, you know, right off near a collar or something like that, and you open the club face up, the leading edge also doesn't get really high, which we'll talk about in some of the other bounces. If you tried to do that, not a good idea.
Definitely not, definitely not. Okay, let's pop it in a little bit closer. Let's go, what do we think, 75? So when we start with these shorter shots, we have much less shaft lean. That's where we start to use the sole a lot more. When we see, you know, the dynamic loft come down, you know, and be particularly strong on the dynamic loft, at times we're really not using the sole at all. You know, we're using the leading edge for sure, but we're never really using the back of the wedge in these full shots. It becomes much more about these partial swings when we're using sort of the different parts of the head from here. A real favorite of mine, the D-Grind, just where that strike is living there, it is exactly where you want it on these little sort of flighted ones.
I think for players that play in like kind of, I would call it standard, or maybe slightly towards the softer conditions, the D-Grind is a perfect go-to because it gives you all of the versatility of the slightly higher bounce, but around the greens you can start to get, you know, cute with it.
You really can.
The versatility of D-Grind, obviously I'm an M-Grind guy. Well, S-Grind as well. I've played 54-10S, but this year just to add a bit more bounce and the versatility of D, I'm excited. I've never used a D-Grind before, but I know we've all chatted in the past about it, and this grind, I think, for, you know, is probably in my opinion, is the most important grind, especially in this loft of wedge.
Would you say the sand that you play out of would be like generally softer, firmer? Where does it sit?
Yeah, our sand's a little bit wet in my opinion for sand. It's not super fluffy by any means.
Okay. And yeah, and that's where if it's something that's really soft, that's where you got to move into the really full sole again.
Yeah.
Maybe something which you're gonna touch on the K-Grind towards the end of the video. But this fits that middle ground for so many players, and I think that's why it is such a crucial one, and you see it in quite a few lofts as well.
Okay, boys, talk me through the S-Grind, the stricker.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of that trailing edge has kind of been buzzed off, and you get a little bit more heel relief with the S-Grind. Again, I've been a player of S-Grind for a long time. Even in fits, you know, sometimes they get that heel stuck a lot of times on these partial shots. We always have the green at 50 yards. I even move it to 30 yards just to get that pressure shot, and that S-Grind really helps just get it through the turf a lot quicker.
No doubt about it. I think when the speed comes off, you make a good point. people use different parts of the head once the speed comes off, once it changes. And generally speaking, we try to encourage them to move progressively back in the sole when they get closer to the green. Using the bounce, I mean, you know, if you've listened or watched any golf instruction, you know, the masters at it talk about using the bounce. What does that mean? Well, it's a slightly early entrance into the turf, but it's doing it in a way where you're so shallow, you're not going to get the club stuck. That's when you start to use the back end of the wedge and really start to use it as it was designed.
Yeah, I think of a good analogy, a good way to visualize it for a lot of people is like skipping a stone, right?
Yep.
If you kind of throw the stone too steep, it's just going to dig, right? If you go in and it's too shallow, the back hits, it kind of goes over and then it doesn't work either.
Yep.
When you have it, and this is where finding the right balance for the loft and the angle of attack that you're going to fit for your swing, when it comes in and it lands like a plane, it just kind of, and that speed is what you can hear inside and out when you're doing a wedge fitting, which I think is always crucial. And it's also, you're going to see a divot pattern that is fairly consistent. Whatever that is for you, it doesn't really, you know, however it translates for your golf game, but you're going to see it pretty steady all the time if it fits you properly. And for using S-Grind, Steve Stricker, you mentioned it, this was basically his go-to grind. That's where the S comes from. Is that, like, he's a great wedge player. Rory talked about him as like watching him hit wedges because he's very, I would say, shallow through the ball.
Very. And
just kind of like, his almost tempo is like 1-2, but it's not about tempo. It's the fact that he goes through pretty square, but to the point where he's using so much of that F sole, they needed to take that back off, and that's where you end up with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you were going to try and teach someone to play their wedges better and become a more consistent wedge player, watch that on a loop. You know, watch Jason Day hit long pitches on a loop. Those guys, the way we've done lots of videos with our great pal Gareth Rafalski, but you know, Gareth is a bit more of a proponent of having, you know, a little bit more wrists in there. But, you know, you see those two in particular, incredible wedge players, just you know, with a single lever, you know, taking the kind of wrists out of it. So let's hit some with the S here. So 75 yards, a fairly full swing with this 58 for me. A little 3/4 maybe. So I can give you a little stricker action.
Good action on that one.
They feel great.
Yeah,
I mean, those last couple
they sound really good.
Felt nice.
Okie doke. So the M-Grind is known as Bob Vokey's favorite grind. A little bit easier to manipulate the club face, but still get a ton of heel and toe versatility.
Yeah, we see that the shape is very similar to the D, but overall, it's, you know, it kind of looks the same, but it really doesn't perform the same.
No.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, I mean, I would completely agree with that. Although they share the same visual, I came out of an M going into a D, and it is entirely different for me. Like, I'm not someone who does well with an M grind. I kind of like the idea of it, you know, the sort of the multifunctionality of it, but I just don't ever perform that well with an M grind. Whereas the D and I are great friends. I love it.
Yeah, I think with the M-Grind, with the versatility, this is where, when we are looking at fitting wedges, this is very important to look at technique as well as the course conditions that you play.
Definitely.
Because we're talking about something where the potential for a player that might be a little steeper, this is probably not the wedge for you. This is that shallow to very much almost like a forward stance, open club face. This is what you're starting to look at. And I mean, Titleist and Vokey does a really good job of segmenting their wedge line. So you're not going to get an M in a 50, right? It's not designed for that. But as you get into the higher lofts, that's where we start to see more versatility in the options provided to the players because of the shots that players are going to hit. And I think this is a good one where, again, I would say maybe the slightly firmer sand, where you get a little bit firmer conditions as well. Someone who is definitely more along on the kind of neutral to shallower side.
Yep.
That's the wedge that this golfer is going to fit into really well.
Definitely. So maybe I'll show you a couple here. So the 60, 8 degrees of bounce. You know, I'll show you the player who it's not for, right? Because I think that a lot of people do pick this one up and it really isn't for them. So if you tend to be the kind of toe in, you know, somebody who's kind of taking a lot of bounce off by kind of towing it in, go a little back in the stance, and they're kind of leaning the shaft a little bit, and they're kind of playing in that little driven shot, right? So we've got 60 degrees of static loft, but 40 degrees of delivered loft. At that point, everything back here is useless, where we're not using that at all, so we're only using what's on the front. So I think, the player who, like you said, RB, likes to maybe kind of play the wedge a little more open, handle back a little bit, more of a kind of vertical setup. Right, so get that dynamic loft up a little bit, 54 degrees of delivered loft, right? So we've got 60 degrees, 54 of delivered, we'll get 8 degrees of bounce. We are using the sole, right? We can do the math on that. It's quite simple.
I think, and that's an important thing for people to really kind of tune into this, is how this is why wedge fitting is so important, because your conditions that you play all the time, you're most likely to be playing the same golf course 80% of the time, I think, is like even more so for a lot of players. If you don't have the right wedge in your bag for the sand that you play in, and you're always using your sand wedge, and you wonder why you struggle out of the sand. Or even if it's a better player and you're really struggling with distance control out of the sand, right? You're going really long, you're never really getting underneath it. It's like maybe you're using a bounce or a wedge that has too much bounce.
Yeah.
Now you get into something with the versatility like this, and you're immediately getting into the sand, but also getting out of the sand faster, right? I know we talk about it a lot. You talk about it a lot when you were hitting irons, is even just the sound through the turf.
Yeah.
It's almost like, as Gary Player would always say, right? Strike the match, strike the match, strike the match. You want it to be quick.
Yeah.
You want it to sound like it's in and out of that turf. You don't want it to sound heavy. You don't want it to sound like you're obviously hitting the ball thin. It's kind of finding that right balance is where you're going to go in and you're going to hit some wedges. All of a sudden you're going to go, that's the one.
Yeah, and then obviously once you get around the greens with the M, you can start to play some intricate shots, right? So one that I think a lot of people don't attempt, but you see the sort of wedge or the real kind of short game gurus, they'll play a little shot where they kind of pop the handle up a little bit, the ball sitting down a little bit, and they'll hit that one where they're kind of almost going to do a little kind of putting stroke, just getting it out that nasty little lie, and they're really using the toe to pop that out. Again, that's utilising that kind of taking the mass away from that toe side. The opposite, if you get in the bunker and you need to kind of, you need to lay that handle down a little bit, and you're kind of trying to chop it out the heel side. You don't want that just bouncing off the kind of harder pan if you're trying to dig that one out. So, that one comes out, and you really can slide that club under, and you can hear that good contact. That's the removing the mass from the heel side that you're using. So it is a very functional wedge.
Now, speaking to sole, speaking to bounce and hitting those shots that you're really open, let's move into the next wedge.
Yes.
So the L-Grind, the very, very low bounce, only comes in 60 degrees. We know as a player, Jordan Spieth loves it for the Open Championship. Anytime you've got that hard pan, that low bounce is going to help you. This is, again, not for the faint of heart. I've had one. It didn't work out too well. But, again, having that, you still have a grind very similar to M, but it's a one-trick pony. It's really for that green side versatility, and I wouldn't be messing around with full shots with this wedge, that's for sure.
I think it's definitely a wedge for those players that play in very firm conditions, very dry, and mostly use it for green side versatility where you're opening up the blade, you're adding a lot of loft, and as you said, Ian, before, right? You take a club that has 60 degrees of loft on it, you hit it with 62, 63, that's where that, 4 degrees of bounce becomes 6 or 7 effectively.
Yeah.
So you're exposing more of the sole. That's where this is going to be helpful. Or you happen to play, you mentioned it already, like firm conditions at the Open. Not that anyone else is going to be playing in the Open, but if you have very firm sand, something where it could be really heavy, it's most of the times wet. This is that one where it is very much specialty, but it's going to help the player that really plays the open face shot.
Yeah, it's a unique animal. Mike, you said it. We don't give it to too many people in the Bay. You need to have a real kind of taste for that style of shot. You need to be playing that kind of open faced, land the plane, skip the stone, like you said, RB. Like, you need to really control low point with this thing. You do not want to be flirting with the front of an L-Grind too much at all. I mean, Spieth is a great example, and is somebody who talks about only ever playing his little shots around the green like he's hitting a cut shot, right? He uses it that way. So, for him, he's trying to kind of like bang that bounce off the ground, trying to kind of come across it, and Mickelson's the same way. The two the best short game players out there, and they kind of play it and see it that exact same way. Lots of people talk about trying to hit little draws. They're two of the people who are trying to hit little fades around the green, and that kind of touches upon why he really likes this little L-Grind. But it's not for everyone.
And in the heel too, like you made a great point of like players are trying to hit that cut with that shot. The hosel, if we can kind of demonstrate here, the hosel is what leads into this shot. So that part of the golf club is the first thing that is exposed to the ground, unlike when someone is coming in with a square face shot, or as you demonstrated earlier, coming in with the toe shot. That across here, if you have the wrong grind and you're really shallow, that's where that leading edge is going to meet golf ball first, and that's not good.
Absolutely. And obviously indoors here, we've got our mat that we hit irons off of, but off of this hard part that we stand on, I mean, you couldn't really play a D or a K or an F or any of those off of something this firm. I'd fancy my chances with the L, though. So that's where, the surface conditions, really do dictate which kind of is going to be best for you. Okay, we'll play a couple of different ones here. So we've hit some full shots. Let's play something that's a bit more that open face, where probably get about, 62 or so on the dynamic loft RB. And just that little parachute shot, 63 delivered loft. So again, we know what part of the club we're using when we do that.
And we can hear it off the turf back here is like, it does, using the analogy, sounds like that quick little in and out match strike.
Yeah.
Right? It's just,
yeah.
I know maybe that doesn't translate that well when I kind of make that noise, but
yeah,
that is what you're hearing.
You're right. I mean, and a big part of wedge fitting, I think indoors or outdoors, is using your ears. What do you hear? Where do you hear contact? Is it before? Is it after? Is it high in the face? Is it low in the face? Heel, toe. Use the acoustics. They are a giveaway. We've got great technology here, but we can obviously listen to what's kind of being done with the strike and with the delivery. I
always used to think when I was a kid, and I thought it was really funny, where like you'd be watching Johnny Miller on TV, and you go, groove low, groove low. You're like, he's in a booth. How can you possibly tell? Let's remember that Johnny Miller is a pretty good player.
Yeah.
So you can hear like those sounds are very in tune, and like for you guys in the Bay, that's important. Out on tour, Aaron talked about it.
Yep.
Like sound plays such a crucial role in the short game because it's not a shot that you're hitting with a lot of speed. And like you would notice it, right? Like if someone hit a fat shot, but it doesn't maybe register fat or chunky, it's gonna all of a sudden sound like, that something about that didn't sound right off the bat.
Definitely. I had a customer a couple weeks ago, and they weren't understanding what bounce does and what these grinds do. And I gave the customer, 2 different wedges, one really low bounce and one really high bounce, and he needed high bounce. And I was like, do you hear the difference? And he's like, yeah, I actually do hear the difference. I was like, that's just better strike. That's getting you efficiently through the ball. And it made a lot of sense. So indoor wedge fits, we are always listening to strike. Strike is the most, and we do it, even if someone hits a, one off the heel on the driver, before the numbers even pop up, you can go, you missed that a little bit, and something they look at you like you're a bit crazy, but when you've done it enough times,
Mike.
you can hear. But for wedges, sound is everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's just touch one more shot on that, because I think the strike point, we talk about hitting a lob shot, we talk about gear effect, we talk about launch and spin. I mean, where they're striking, the last one was pretty centered, the first one was high, right? So you get that higher launch, you get a little lower spin. No, I'm not trying to spin this shot. We're using gravity, we're using the angle of descent to stop this golf ball. So it does, so we'll play an open one and then we'll play a pretty square one, and we shall see some totally different strike locations.
Little softy there.
Little softy. So you can see how, it really moves up the head, doesn't it? Because you're laying that, you've went from having a tall face to having an extremely shallow target. You know, so it's very, very easy to hit it up there. That's why when we talk about this, you know, CG, sort of the meat of the head on this wedge, there's a lot of mass up there now. So we want to retain as much of that ball speed as we can. Okay, let's play the straight-faced one.
Go ahead.
Come on.
Go ahead.
Got to speeden up that green, Mike. Should have rolled it this morning.
It's amazing the difference though, like the difference between hitting that shot with a D-grind and that shot with an L-grind, like every one of these is just grabbing. Because it's, I mean, you can see like 53, 54 degrees of dynamic where there's no bounce being used. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so totally different there. Once we apply 57 degrees of dynamic loft, we catch it much lower down the head. And then we start to use the wedge kind of as designed on those little shots. But that needs to be part of your repertoire. And I don't think it is part of many people's. That's why the L is a bit of a risky character.
Definitely.
It's very much a specialty golf club for a very specific player. And the next one we're going to show off, the K-Grind, very specific for a whole other reason. So just as the L-Grind was to the very shallow, open-face golfer, this is the exact opposite. This is the Vokey K-Grind. It is only available in the highest lofted options, and it has a lot of bounce, and it has a very wide sole. This is important because not only does bounce play a role in, you know, how it sits, but also the effective bounce of how wide the sole is, which I think is very important because you can have a wedge that has a lot of bounce but a very thin sole, or you could have a wedge that has fairly low bounce but a very wide sole. It's actually going to play like it has effectively more bounce when you start opening it up.
Definitely.
But the K-Grind is not a one you want to open up ever.
No. I mean, there is a little bit of room for it. I know in the past there has been the low bounce K and stuff like that, but this is what you see is what you get. This is a pretty thick sole.
Now, you would say for this player, what type of sand conditions, what kind of course conditions would gravitate towards this?
I mean, someone who just, you know, smacks down on it, it's going to help. It's going to pop that ball straight up, which this is a popular one for us in the fitting bay, you know, just getting that club in the turf, but, you know, helping get that ball up as fast as possible.
I don't want to use the word higher handicap wedge. Even I struggle trying to like get to that point because I don't want to say that. But if you are someone that tends to struggle with wedges, hits a lot of chunky wedges, this could be a wedge that really helps you because you're not trying to add a lot of versatility to your game. You're not hitting a lot of shots where you're opening it up or you're kind of playing with the lie angle when you're addressing the ball. This is, I want to play it pretty square-faced, got some soft conditions, and I want to get it forward and get it on the green. Now, we see it in better player bags on the tour, but we also see it in a lot, to your point, a lot of golfers that come in that struggle. This is a great wedge for this player, and you're going to demonstrate how you'd use it.
Yeah, I think this wedge kind of almost simplifies things from a technique standpoint a little bit. You know, we're playing some intricate shots with the L, we're opening it, we're kind of, you know, I'm really having to think my way through it. It's not the time of year where our short games are awfully sharp here at this part of the world. But this guy, you know, you're gonna use the bounce. You've got no choice but to use the bounce. It's going to influence the strike location to be much lower. So you're going to see some pretty spinny little pitches with this guy. But yeah, I mean, play with a square sole is kind of or a square setup is the ideal way to play the K.
I know we kind of joked about it before we started hitting some shots here and talking about this wedge is, you know, we're not really sure what the K stands for, but, you know, seeing you hit those shots, you know, jokingly, it could stand for consistency if you want to spell consistency wrong.
Right.
Because it just offers you to hit the same shot over and over and over again, and you're going to get that. You're going to see that. You're going to see so much better results if you are this player than something like the L-Grind, where you're rolling the dice on every single wedge shot. And I think it really does come down to those softer conditions, that square face. And if you are potentially a faster player that does get into the turf a lot, this is something that's really going to help you. And I know when the K-Grind first came out, I talked to a lot of golfers and like, I can't hit this club with an open face. It's like, it's because it's not supposed to, right? And that's where I think it's really important and that's why we want to do this video, is to educate when you go in. If you don't get the chance to do a fitting like this, you can say, okay, I'm educated in knowing what I need to, what questions I've asked myself, and you can take that to the shop or your pro and order your wedges, and you know what you're going to get to the golf course is going to be ones that match your game a lot better.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, you know, with this guy, you know, if you're playing it like I was playing that there, so I play this shot kind of middle of the stands, shaft a fraction ahead, and just kind of make a little half swing at it. You know, that type of shot works well. But also if you're the type of player who goes, you know what, I don't really trust the handle in that position, the ball that far forward. I kind of want to just guarantee the strike a little bit. I think with this back a touch and the handle a touch more forward, you know, this wedge can also do really well on that particular shot. You can hear that strike is again in the right spot. With some of the other wedges, that kind of moves up the head and it becomes a problem. You don't quite get it to the green. But I think the K, for the person who struggles with contact, is a fantastic option. You know, back of the stands, handle forward, use all that mass down low. You'll do pretty well with those.
It's exactly what you said. You know, the L, that open face, trying to land it, and this is the draw wedge, right? This is the one where you're getting the handle forward, you're getting it close. This is what's really going to work for that player.
I hope Bob and Aaron forgive me for this, but what do you see in the design of every wedge that's on an infomercial? A big, wide, rounded sole, right? This is the biggest, widest, most rounded sole of all the Vokey line. It's designed to be foolproof. Regardless of your entry point, it will do something to advance you forward. The L-Grind's not offering you that. It's offering you magic or tragic, right? It's offering you potentially great strikes, skip it in there, stop it, or you'll put the divot over the top of the ball.
Which we don't really want to do.
We don't need that, no.
So hopefully you found this informative. The biggest goal was, because we get so many questions about this, to help you make a better decision when it comes to your short game. We talk about launch and spin with wedges. We talk about launch and spin with drivers. We talk about maximizing distance and optimization as far as all your numbers when it comes to your full shots. But in your short shots, we're not so much worried about that as we are is how the ground contact plays such a crucial role, because what is it? Like at least more than 50% of your shots are hit inside 100 yards, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is the big thing, the big takeaway here. So use this next time you're looking at wedges. Ask the right questions to yourself when you are looking for wedges. And please use the comment section below if you have any more things that you want us to cover, because we want this to be a guide. We want this to be something that applies to Vokey wedges, as well as any other wedges that you're looking at when we're talking about high, mid, low balance options, what that means to your short game, and what that means for helping you play better golf. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.